ISDS, the United States of America is in more danger today than she has ever been. A secret, covert terrorist organization has been working within to destroy America, its Constitution, and everything for which she stands. This presentation gives all the details and shows how far this terrorist organization has been able to progress in the destruction of America. This book, second edition, teaches the parts of history you didn't learn about in school. In only 131 pages. 3. Chapter 1. Target. America, the United States, has been the victim of a covert, long-term effort to destroy our form of government of the people, by the people, and for the people, almost from our beginning, and must soon openly face the most deadly enemy it will ever have to face. This enemy is not only the usual military enemy, but it has the organization and the capability for massive espionage of society and clandestine operations already within the United States at almost every level of government. Hard for most to believe, it uses an unsuspecting, innocent facade that is perfect to hide its covert operations. In fact, right now, this enemy is working, hidden in plain sight, to undermine the form of government and constitutional principles that made this country the greatest nation in the world, and most Americans are completely distracted and unaware of it. This well-known but unsuspected organization is so successful at its deception, it is welcomed in America with open arms. But be not deceived. This enemy has already for years been infiltrated into the highest levels and departments of the U.S. government and poses an extreme threat and present danger to America. It's like a silent, undetected spreading cancer. Let us look at a little history that you very likely were never taught about and understand the methods this enemy has used in the past and how it is still secretly working today. Europe was finally at rest. The Napoleonic Wars were over, having lasted nearly 23 years. The Napoleonic Wars were a series of wars between Napoleonic France and the shifting political alliances of other European powers that produced a brief French hegemony over most of Europe. Along with the French Revolutionary Wars, the Napoleonic Wars constitute a 23-year period of recurrent conflict that concluded only with the Battle of Waterloo and Napoleon's second abdication on June 22, 1815. For the brilliant and crafty Napoleon Bonaparte had covered Europe with the blood of her noblest sons. But at long last, there was peace. In the aftermath, European sovereigns convened a general council in Vienna, Austria in 1814. This council has come to be known as the Congress of Vienna. The Congress continued its proceedings for 1 year, ending in 1815. This international conference was called to create a balance among the European powers in such a way so as to prevent future wars and maintain peace and stability on the European continent. The first attempt at what today could be called the European Union/Common Market. The Congress of Vienna. The Congress functioned through formal meetings, such as working groups and official diplomatic functions. However, a large portion of the Congress was conducted informally at salons, banquets, and balls. 5. The Congress of Vienna was actually developed into an intentional black conspiracy against popular governments, at which the high contracting parties announced at its close that they had formed a holy alliance. The Congress of Vienna has frequently been criticized by 19th century and more recent historians for ignoring national and liberal impulses and for imposing a stifling reaction on the continent. It was an integral part in what became known as the Conservative Order, in which the liberties and civil rights associated with the American and French revolutions were de-emphasized, so that a fair balance of power, peace, and stability might be achieved. This was a subversive cloak under which they masked to deceive the people and smelled of a Hegelian dialectic thesis in the making. Later, the particular business of the Congress of Verona, it developed, was the ratification of Article 6 of the Congress of Vienna in 1815 and amended in 1818 at the Congress of Aix-la-Chapelle, Aachen, also known as the final act of the Congress of Vienna, in the name of the most holy and undivided Trinity, which had as its 3 main goals. 1. Balance the powers of Europe to coexist peacefully. 2. Enclose France's borders. And 3. Restore conservative order, which was, in short, a promise to prevent or destroy popular governments wherever found, and to re-establish monarchy rule where it had been set aside. This was a prelude to re-establishing the papal supremacy and that held sway through the Dark Ages in Europe, hence the Holy Alliance, where monarchs ruled by divine right granted by the papacy alone. Spain, represented by Don Peter Gomez Labrador, Knight of the Royal and Distinguished Order of Charles III, and his Councillor of State, did not sign this treaty, but acceded to it by an act of accession dated 7th June, 1817. The high contracting parties of this compact, which were Russia, Prussia, Germany, Austria, and Pope Pius VII, King of the Papal States, entered into a secret treaty to do so. Burke McCarty, The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, Aryavarta Publishing, 1924, p. 7. According to McCarty, the Congress of Vienna formed the Holy Alliance, whose primary goal was the destruction of all popular governments. Popular governments are those where the government allows its subjects to enjoy certain inalienable rights. 6. Can you think of any popular governments that were establishing themselves in the world and granting their citizens certain inalienable rights around the year 1815? U.S. Senator Robert L. Owen placed in the Congressional Record of April 25, 1916, the following statement, which shows clearly he thought the primary target of the Holy Alliance was the United States. Holy Alliance, having destroyed popular government in Spain and in Italy, had well-laid plans also to destroy popular government in the American colonies, which had revolted from Spain and Portugal in Central and South America under the influence of the successful example of the United States. It was because of this conspiracy against the American republics by the European monarchies that the great English statesman, George Canning, called the attention of our government to it. Ibid. pp. 9-10. George Canning, a Prime Minister of Great Britain, died in office after a premiership of only 119 days. Known by many as the Lost Leader, because of his short tenure as Prime Minister of only 119 days before his death, Canning still left his mark on British political history. Prime Minister George Canning, he is one of only 4 Prime Ministers to have a statue in Parliament Square, the others being Benjamin Disraeli, David Lloyd George, and Winston Churchill. While Canning's time as Prime Minister was short, his distinguished political career spanned 34 years, from securing a seat in the Commons in 1793 to his death in 1827. Senator Owen understood from the Congress of Vienna that the united, almost entirely Catholic monarchies of Europe, when opportunity arose, would seek to destroy the great American Republic and its blood-bought freedoms. Senator Owen was not the only one who knew about this conspiracy against American freedom and the Constitution. Senator Robert L. Owen in 1894, R.W. Thompson, American Secretary of the Navy, wrote, "The sovereigns of the Holy Alliance had massed large armies and soon entered into a pledge to devote them to the suppression of all uprisings of the people in favor of free government, and he Pope Pius VII desired to devote 7. The Jesuits, supported by his pontifical power, to the accomplishment of that end. He knew how faithfully they would apply themselves to that work, and hence he counseled them, in his decree of restoration, to strictly observe the useful advices and salutary counsels, whereby Loyola had made absolution the cornerstone of the society." R.W. Thompson, The Footprints of the Jesuits, Hunt and Eaton, 1894, p. 251. R.W. Thompson pinpointed exactly who would be the agents used by the monarchs of Europe to destroy the Republic of America, namely, the Jesuits of Rome. What is a Jesuit? Dictionary definition of Jesuit, Jesuit stress Jez Hewitt, stress Jesuit / noun. Jesuit, plural noun, Jesuits 1. A member of the Society of Jesus, a Roman Catholic order of priests founded by St. Ignatius Loyola, St. Francis Xavier, and others in 1534 to do missionary work. The order was zealous in opposing the Reformation. Despite periodic persecution, it has retained an important influence in Catholic thought and education. Society of Jesus logo. The Society of Jesus is a religious congregation of the Catholic Church, which originated in 16th century Spain. The members are called Jesuits. Founded August 15, 1534, Montmartre, Paris, France. Founded at Paris, France, officialized in Rome abbreviation. S.J. Jesuits formation. 1534 AD leader 2024. Arturo Marcelino Sosa Abascal, October 14, 2016 from Caracas, Venezuela. George Numier of the conservative American Spectator described Sosa as a Marxist, a Venezuelan communist and modernist. Founders: Ignatius of Loyola, Francis Xavier, Peter Faber. 8. Pope Francis is the first Jesuit pope. Jorge Mario Bergoglio from Buenos Aires, Argentina. What are the Jesuits? Also known as God's Marines or the Company. The order of priests and brothers was founded by St. Ignatius of Loyola in 1534 with 6 other students at the University of Paris. St. Ignatius had a military background, and early adherents referred to themselves as the Company of Jesus, hence both of the nicknames that live to this day. Probably happy that the Jesuits were not forming their own church, like Martin Luther a few decades earlier, Pope Paul III granted them commendation in 1537 to become Roman Catholic priests. 3 years later, he gave them the right to become their own order of priests. As the head of the new order, Ignatius sent his priests throughout Catholic Europe to start schools, colleges, and seminaries. By Ignatius's death in 1556, the Jesuits had already founded 74 colleges on 3 continents. With Catholic doctrine their missionary work as a core value, the Jesuits have been known for spreading Catholicism throughout the world. Their 2 goals are: 1. Undo everything that Protestantism had done, and 2. Establish schools and universities to maintain the relevancy of the Catholic Church as the foundation to re-establish papal supremacy throughout the world. Pope Francis's namesake, St. Francis Xavier, is in particular credited with the Church's expansion in Asia. Update: Pope Francis later clarified that he had taken the name from St. Francis of Assisi, not St. Francis Xavier. St. Francis of Assisi is the symbol for peace, austerity, and poverty. What is at the heart of being a Jesuit? Under St. Ignatius, the Society of Jesus believed that reform in the Catholic Church began with reform of the individual. The founding members of the Society of Jesus took a vow of poverty, chastity, and strict obedience to Catholic doctrine under Ignatius. Current Jesuits take the same 3 vows today, along with a vow of obedience to the Pope. This idea eventually and quickly led to Jesuit enforcement of Catholic doctrine upon individuals in the Inquisitions. Note: since 1815, there has been a continual assault on America by the Jesuits and Jesuit coadjutors to try to destroy the constitutional rights of this great nation. The famous inventor of the Morse code, Samuel B. Morse, also wrote of this sinister plot against the United States. 9. The author undertakes to show that a conspiracy against the liberties of this republic is now in full action, under the direction of the wily Prince Metternich of Austria, who, knowing the impossibility of obliterating this troublesome example of a great and free nation by force of arms, is attempting to accomplish his object through the agency of an army of Jesuits. The array of facts and arguments going to prove the existence of such a conspiracy will astonish any man who opens the book with the same incredulity as we did. Samuel B. Morse, Foreign Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the United States, Crocker and Brewster, 1835, preface. Was Samuel Morse a deluded fanatic or conspiracy theorist? No, he was an intelligent, patriotic, well-informed witness. Samuel F. B. Morse. The array of books written that detail the sinister plots of the Congress of Vienna and the Jesuits against the American Republic are numerous. That this conspiracy has raged since prior to 1815 is a fact of history. It can clearly be shown that this conspiracy is still in relentless full force today, and that it is the reason America is having so many worsening political, social, and economic problems at the present time, and is very close to losing her constitutional freedoms. That Jesuit status as the nucleus of the Catholic threat to the Protestant enterprise in the United States goes back to the beginnings of the Catholic experience in British America. George Calvert, 1st Baron Baltimore. 10. Once George Calvert, 1580, 1632. Brought in Andrew White, 1579-1656. To assist him in planning for his American colony in the Chesapeake area in 1630, the Society of Jesus became the public face of Catholicism in Britain's North American colonies. a position it held until the suppression of the Society of Jesus in 1773. Uprising against Catholic rulers in Maryland and New York in the 17th century inevitably included Jesuits among their targets, with tragic results in some instances. Jesuit Andrew White, the apostle to Maryland, a forefather of Georgetown University, sadly, most people know very little about the Jesuits. The reason for this is that they are a very secretive society regarding their covert efforts. In order to more clearly understand what the Order of the Jesuits is, please consider the following quotation. Throughout Christendom, Protestantism was menaced by formidable foes. The first triumphs of the Reformation past, Rome summoned new forces, hoping to accomplish its destruction. At this time, the Order of the Jesuits was created, the most cruel, unscrupulous, and powerful of all the champions of popery. Cut off from earthly ties and human interests, dead to the claims of natural affection, reason and conscience wholly silenced, they knew no rule, no tie, but that of their order, and no duty but to extend its power. The gospel of Christ had enabled its adherents to meet danger and endure suffering, undismayed by cold, hunger, toil, and poverty, to uphold the banner of truth in face of the rack, the dungeon, and the stake. To combat these forces, Jesuitism inspired its followers with a fanaticism that enabled them to endure like dangers, and to oppose to the power of truth all the weapons of deception. There was no crime too great for them to commit, no deception too base for them to practice, no disguise too difficult for them to assume. Vowed to perpetual poverty and humility, it was their studied aim to secure wealth and power, to be devoted to the overthrow of Protestantism and the re-establishment of the papal supremacy. When appearing as members of their order, they wore a garb of sanctity, visiting prisons and hospitals, ministering to the sick and the poor, professing to have renounced the world and bearing the sacred name of Jesus, who went about doing good. But under this blameless exterior, the most criminal and deadly purposes were often concealed. It was a fundamental principle of the order that the end justifies the means. By this code, 11 lying, theft, perjury, assassination were not only pardonable but commendable when they served the interests of the Church. Under various disguises, the Jesuits worked their way into offices of state, climbing up to be the counselors of kings and shaping the policy of nations. They became servants to act as spies upon their masters. They established colleges for the sons of princes and nobles, and schools for the common people, and the children of Protestant parents were drawn into an observance of popish rites. All the outward pomp and display of the Romish worship was brought to bear to confuse the mind and dazzle and captivate the imagination, and thus the liberty for which the fathers had toiled and bled was betrayed by the sons. The Jesuits rapidly spread themselves over Europe, and wherever they went, there followed a revival of popery. E.G. White, The Great Controversy, pp. 234-235, Pacific Press Publishing, Assen, 1911. Today, the Jesuits function as the papacy's secret worldwide intelligence agency and secret police. They are very secretive and go to great lengths to keep their operations secret. Unless it is expedient for their purposes, they tell no one that they are Jesuits. To all outside appearances, they mostly appear as normal people, Jesuit coadjutors. One last author, J. Wayne Laurens, will be cited here. They are Jesuits. This society of men, after exerting their tyranny for upwards of 200 years, at length became so formidable to the world, threatening the entire subversion of all social order, that even the Pope, whose devoted subjects they are, and must be, by the vow of their society, was compelled to dissolve them. Pope Clement suppressed the Jesuit order in 1773. They had not been suppressed, however, for 50 years, before the waning influence of popery and despotism again required their useful labors to resist the light of democratic liberty, and the Pope Pius Roman VII simultaneously with the formation of the Holy Alliance, 1815, revived the order of the Jesuits in all their power. And do Americans need to be told what Jesuits are? They are a secret society, backroom rulers of the Masonic order, with super-added features of revolting odiousness and 1,000 times more dangerous. They are not merely priests or of one religious creed, They are merchants and lawyers and editors and men of any profession, having no outward badge by which to be recognized. They are about in all your society. They can assume any character, that of angels of light or ministers of darkness, to accomplish their one great end. They are all educated men, prepared and sworn to start at any moment, and in any direction, and for any service, commanded by the general of their order, bound to no family, community, or country by the ordinary ties which bind men, and sold for life to the cause of the Roman pontiff. J. Wayne Lauren's The Crisis in America, or The Enemies of America Unmasked, G. D. Miller, 1855, pp. 265-67. 12 Ignatius of Loyola founded the Jesuit order in the 1540s. Its position in the Roman Catholic Church was solidified during the Council of Trent, which ran from 1545 to 1563. The Council of Trent was the formal Roman Catholic reply to the doctrinal challenges of the Protestant Reformation. It served to define Catholic doctrine and made sweeping decrees on self-reform, helping to revitalize the Roman Catholic Church in the face of Protestant expansion. The Council of Trent was convened with one great goal in mind: how to stop the Protestant Reformation and re-establish the superiority of the Catholic Church. It has been described as the embodiment of the Counter-Reformation. The Reformation began in 1517 when Martin Luther, the fearless German, Roman Catholic, friar, nailed 95 theses on the door of the Wittenberg Chapel in an effort to reform the Catholic Church. These theses challenged, among other things, the heinous doctrine of selling of indulgences taught by Rome that declared a man could save himself and loved ones by dropping enough coins into the Catholic Church's coffers. Luther's great teachings that the Bible only is the standard for all doctrine and practice, and that a person is justified before God through faith in Jesus Christ alone, sent thrills through the hearts of thousands throughout Europe and shock waves through the halls of the Vatican, which valued tradition more than Scripture. But sadly, the descendants of Luther's church have returned to the arms of the Mother Church. 13 Roman Catholic Martin Luther. Thus, the Council of Trent was convened to counter and destroy the Reformation. Hence it is known as the Counter-Reformation, and the Jesuits would be the chief tools of Rome to undo and destroy every trace of Protestantism wherever it was found. Do not be misled, the Counter-Reformation is still very much alive and well today. America's two greatest documents, the Declaration of Independence, https://www.archives.gov/foundingdocs/declaration transcript, and the U.S. Constitution. https://www.archives.gov/foundingdocs/constitution/ga equals 26,090,941. 1,294,629,640. 1,620,041,440. 8-1,550,017,702. 1,620,041 are filled with Protestant declarations that are absolutely intolerable to the Vatican and the Jesuits of Rome. It is interesting to note that approximately 11,770 amendments to the U.S. Constitution have been proposed since its original writing. However, only 27 amendments have been adopted, a success rate of only 0.002%, effectively 0%. This indicates the Constitution, as written by the Founding Fathers over 240 years ago, still serves the freedom needs of the American people very, very well. Does it surprise you that the Vatican officially condemns the founding documents of the United States? The Vatican condemned the Declaration of Independence as wickedness and called the Constitution of the United States a satanic document. Avro Manhattan, The Dollar and the Vatican, Ozark Book Publishers, 1988, p. 26. Part of the reason the Vatican hates the U.S. Constitution can be found in the papal bull of Pope Nicholas V, June 19, 1452, Dum Diversas, which authorized Afonso V of Portugal to conquer Saracens and pagans and consign them to perpetual servitude, slavery. Pope Calixtus III reiterated the bull in 1456 with Inter Caetera, not to be confused with Alexander VI's version by the same name. renewed by Pope Sixtus IV in 1481 and Pope Leo X in 1514 with Procellus Donotius. The concept of the consignment of exclusive spheres of influence to certain nation-states was extended to the Americas in 1493 by Pope Alexander VI with Inter Caetera. We grant you by these present documents, with our apostolic authority, full and free permission to invade, search out, capture, and subjugate the Saracens and pagans and any other unbelievers and enemies of Christ wherever they may be, as well as their kingdoms, duchies, counties, principalities, and other property, and to reduce their persons into perpetual servitude. In plain English, Pope Alexander VI issued a papal bull or decree in 1493 called Inter Caetera, in which he authorized Spain and Portugal to colonize the Americas and its native peoples as subjects. The decree asserts the rights of Spain and Portugal to colonize, convert, and enslave those people. 14. Do you really believe that idea and goal is from a Christian church? Remember this. John 18:36 Jesus said, Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. Philippians 3:20. For our conversation is in heaven, from whence also we look for the Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. Here is part of the Jesuit oath. I do further promise and declare that I will have no opinion or will of my own, or any mental reservation whatever, even as a corpse or cadaver, but will unhesitatingly obey each and every command that I may receive from my superiors in the militia of the Pope. I furthermore promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth, and that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, burn, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs and the wombs of their women and crush their infants' heads against the walls, in order to annihilate forever their execrable race. That when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poisoned cup, the strangulating cord, the steel of the poniard, or the leaden bullet, regardless of the honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the person or persons, whatever may be their condition in life, either public or private, as I at any time may be directed so to do by any agent of the Pope or superior of the Brotherhood of the Holy Faith, of the Society of Jesus. Edwin A. Sherman, the Engineer Corps of Hell or Rome Sapper, and Miners, Private Subscription, 1883 pp. 118-124. The Jesuit Oath of Induction is recorded in the Congressional Record of the USA, House Bill 1523, contested election case of Eugene C. Bonnewell against those. S. Butler, Feb. 15, 1913, pp. 30-153216. It can be located in the Library of Congress, Washington, D.C., Library of Congress Catalog Card #6643354 made public in 1883. https://www.gov/item/030038891/. 15. The text of the complete oath can be found at http://www.reformation.org/Jesuit-oath, HTML, and https://archive. org/stream/secretinstructio 460 lond/secretinstructio 460 lond djvu, txt. And yes, we know you cannot believe everything you read on the internet. However, when a document is recorded in the Congressional Record of the United States, you can know that it does in fact exist. To think that any sane person would concur with such an abominable oath defies reason. One could not even imagine a more despicable oath. The word heretic in the above quote refers to anyone who disagrees with the Pope. It is important to think about the big picture and consider all the facts and the weight of evidence when you encounter something that seems so unbelievable. For example, consider the following. In a letter from John Adams, second President of the United States, to then President Thomas Jefferson about the Jesuits we read. Shall we not have regular swarms of them here, in as many disguises as only a king of the gypsies can assume, dressed as painters, publishers, writers, and schoolmasters? If ever there was a body of men who merited eternal damnation on earth, and in hell it is this society of Loyola's the Jesuits. George Reamer, The New Jesuits, Little, Brown and Co., 1971, p. 14. 16. John Adams, There was no disguise they could not assume, and therefore there was no place into which they could not penetrate. They could enter unheard the closet of the monarch or the cabinet of the statesman. They could sit unseen in convocation or general assembly and mingle unsuspected in the deliberations and debates. There was no tongue they could not speak, and no creed they could not profess, and thus there was no people among whom they might not sojourn, and no church whose membership they might not enter and whose functions they might not discharge. They could execrate the Pope with the Lutheran and swear the solemn league with the Covenanter. J.A. Wiley, The History of Protestantism, Vol. II, p. 412. A few more quotes from history about the Jesuits. The Jesuits are a military organization, not a religious order. Their chief is a general of an army, not the mere father abbot of a monastery. And the aim of this organization is power. Power in its most despotic exercise. Absolute power, universal power, power to control the world by the volition of a single man. Jesuitism is the most absolute of despotisms, and at the same time the greatest and most enormous of abuses. The general of the Jesuits insists on being master, sovereign, over the sovereign. Wherever the Jesuits are admitted, they shall be masters, cost what it may. Their society is by nature dictatorial, and therefore it is the irreconcilable enemy of all constituted authority. Every act, every crime, however atrocious, is a meritorious work, if committed for the interest of the society of the Jesuits or by the order of the general. Napoleon Bonaparte, General Munthalin, Memorial of the Captivity of Napoleon at St. Helena, pp. 62, 174. Furthermore, we declare, we proclaim, we define that it is absolutely necessary for salvation that every creature be subject to the Roman pontiff. Pope Boniface, in the light of these quotes and statements from history, several questions immediately arise. Since the Jesuits began a direct assault on America in 1815, and nothing seems to stand in their way, then are the policies in place and carried out today in America under the control of this despot of Rome? Have the assassinations of certain presidents, like Abraham Lincoln, William McKinley, James Garfield, and William Henry Harrison, John F. Kennedy, been Jesuit-inspired? Have the atrocities, like Pearl Harbor, Waco, Oklahoma City bombing, World Trade Center Twin Towers in New York City destruction, and possible the global coronavirus pandemic and its follow-on effects on the U.S. and global economies, been planned behind the walls of the Vatican? Note, Dr. Anthony Fauci was educated in Jesuit educational institutions his entire life and clearly functioned as a Jesuit coadjutor would. What about our precious Constitution and the Bill of Rights that have come under such unrelenting attack in the past few decades? Is this the ultimate covert method and goal of the Jesuits to annihilate our precious freedoms that were purchased at so great a cost? The following chapters will analyze some of these very sobering questions. 17. As if the Congress of Vienna was not clear enough as to the objectives of the European Catholic monarchs and the Jesuit order, there were two more congresses that were also convened. The first of these was held at Verona in 1822. During this Congress, it was decided that America would be the target of Jesuit emissaries and that America's form of government was to be destroyed at all costs. Every principle of the Constitution was to be dissolved, and new Jesuitical principles were to be put into place in order to exalt the papacy to dominion in America. Again, U.S. Senator Robert Owen D., Oklahoma, entered into the congressional record. I wish to put in the record the secret Treaty of Verona of November 22, 1822, showing what this ancient conflict is between the rule of the few and the rule of the many. I wish to call the attention of the Senate to this treaty, because it is the threat of this treaty which was the basis of the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, written by President James Monroe, holds that as a principle of U.S. policy, originated by the President in 1823, that any intervention by external powers in the politics of the Americas is a potentially hostile act against the U.S. and would be treated as such. The Treaty of Verona throws a powerful white light upon the conflict between monarchical government and government by the people. The Holy Alliance under the influence of Clemens I von Metternich, the Premier of Austria in 1822, issued this remarkable secret document. Prince Metternich, 1815, Secret Treaty of Verona American Diplomatic Code, 1770-81884 Vol. 2. Elliot, p. 179. 18. The undersigned, specially authorized to make some additions to the Treaty of the Holy Alliance, after having exchanged their respective credentials, have agreed as follows. Article 1. The high contracting powers, being convinced that the system of representative government is equally as incompatible with the monarchical principles as the maxim of the sovereignty of the people with the divine right, engage mutually, in the most solemn manner, to use all that their efforts to put an end to the system of representative governments, in whatever county it may exist in Europe, and to prevent it being introduced in those countries where it is not yet known. Article 2. As it cannot be doubted that the liberty of the press is the most powerful means used by the pretended supporters of the rights of nations to the detriment of those of princes, the high contracting parties promise reciprocally to adopt all proper measures to suppress it, not only in their own states, but also in the rest of Europe. Article 3. Convinced that the principles of religion contribute most powerfully to keep nations in the state of passive obedience which they owe to their princes, the high contracting parties declare it to be their intention to sustain in their respective states those measures, which clergy may adopt, with the aim of ameliorating their own interests, intimately connected with the preservation of the authority of the princes, and the contracting powers join in offering their thanks to the Pope for what he has already done for them, and solicit his constant cooperation in their views of submitting the nations. Article 4. The situation of Spain and Portugal unite unhappily all the circumstances to which this treaty has particular reference. The contracting parties, in confiding to France the care of putting an end to them, engaged to assist her in the matter which may the least compromit them with their own people, and the people of France by means of a subsidy on the part of the two empires of 20 million of francs every year from the date of the signature of this treaty to the end of the war. Article 5. In order to establish in the peninsula in the order of things which existed before the Revolution of Cadiz, and to ensure the entire execution of the articles of the present treaty, the high contracting parties give to each other the reciprocal assurance that as long as their views are not fulfilled, rejecting all other ideas of utility or other measure to be taken, they will address themselves with the shortest possible delay to all the authorities existing in their states and to all their agents in foreign countries, with the view to establish connections tending toward the accomplishment of the objects proposed by this treaty. Article 6. This treaty shall be renewed with such changes as new circumstances may give occasion for, either at a new Congress or at the court of one of the contracting parties, as soon as the war with Spain shall be terminated. Article 7. The present treaty shall be ratified and the ratifications exchanged at Paris within the space of 6 months. Made at Verona the 22nd November, 1822. For Austria, Metternich for France, Chateaubriand for Prussia, BRNSDT for Russia, NESSELROD. 19 U.S. Senator Robert Owen continues. I ask to have printed in the Congressional Record this secret treaty, because I think it ought to be called now to the attention of the people of the United States and of the world. This evidence of the conflict between the rule of the few versus popular government should be emphasized on the minds of the people of the United States, that the conflict now waging throughout the world may be more clearly understood. For after all, said the great pending war springs from the weakness and frailty of government by the few, where human error is far more probable than the error of the many, where aggressive war is only permitted upon the authorizing vote of those whose lives are jeopardized in the trenches of modern war. Mr. SHAFROTH. Mr. President, I should like to have the senators state whether in that treaty there was not a coalition formed between the powerful countries of Europe to re-establish the sovereignty of Spain in the republics of South and Central America. Senator Owen, I was just going to comment upon that, and I am going to take but a few moments to do so because I realize the pressure of other matters. This Holy Alliance, having put a Bourbon prince upon the throne of France by force, then used France to suppress the condition of Spain. Immediately afterwards, and by this very treaty gave her a subsidy of 20 million francs annually to enable her to wage war upon the people of Spain and prevent their exercise of any measure of the right of self-government. The Holy Alliance immediately did the same thing in Italy by sending Austrian troops to Italy, where the people there attempted to exercise a like measure of liberal constitutional self-government. And it was not until the printing press, which the Holy Alliance so stoutly opposed, taught the people of Europe the value of liberty that finally one country after another seized a greater and greater right of self-government. Until now, it may be fairly said that nearly all the nations of Europe have a very large measure of self-government. However, I wish to call the attention of the Senate to this important history in the growth of constitutional popular self-government. The Holy Alliance made its powers felt by the wholesale drastic suppression of the press in Europe, by universal censorship, by killing free speech and all ideas of popular rights, and by the complete suppression of popular government. The Holy Alliance having destroyed popular government in Spain, and Italy had well-laid plans also to destroy popular government in the American colonies, which had revolted from Spain and Portugal in Central and South America under the influence of the successful example of the United States. It was because of this conspiracy against the American republics by the European monarchies that the great English statesman, Canning, called the attention of our government to it. And our statesmen then, including Thomas Jefferson, who was still living at that time, took an active part to bring about the declaration by President Monroe in his next annual message to the Congress of the United States that the United States would regard it as an act of hostility to the government of the United States and an unfriendly act if this coalition, or if any power of 20 Europe ever undertook to establish upon the American continent any control of any American republic, or to acquire any territorial rights. This is the so-called Monroe Doctrine, the threat under the secret Treaty of Verona to suppress popular government in the American republics is the basis of the Monroe Doctrine. This secret treaty sets forth clearly the conflict between monarchical government and popular government, and the government of the few as against the government on the many. It is a part, in reality, of developing popular sovereignty when we demand for women equal rights to life, to liberty, to the possession of property, to an equal voice in the making of the laws and the administration of the laws. This demand on the part of the women is made by men, and it ought to be made by men as well as by thinking, progressive women, as it will promote human liberty and human happiness. I sympathize with it, and I hope that all parties will in the national conventions give their approval to this larger measure of liberty to the better half of the human race. Senator Owen, Congressional Record 1916. The other meeting was held in Chieri, Italy in 1825. Here is what was decided there. In 1825, some 11 years after the revival of the Jesuit order, a secret meeting of leading Jesuits was held at their college of Chieri near Turin, in northern Italy. At that gathering, plans were discussed for the advancement of papal power worldwide, for the destabilizing of governments who stood in the way, and for the crushing of all opposition to Jesuit schemes and ambitions. What we aim at is the empire of the world. We must give them the great men of earth, to understand that the cause of evil, the bad leaven, will remain as long as Protestantism shall exist, that Protestantism must therefore be utterly abolished. Heretics are the enemies that we are bound to exterminate. Then the Bible, that serpent which with head erect and eyes flashing threatens us with its venom while it trails along the ground, shall be changed into a rod as soon as we are able to seize it. Hector Macpherson, The Jesuits in History, Ozark Book Publishers, 1997, Appendix. The goal of Chieri is clear: destroy Protestantism at any cost and restore the temporal power of the papacy worldwide. As we watched Pope John Paul II traversing the globe and being accepted worldwide as the man of peace, we can see how well the Jesuit plan, instituted at Chieri, is still working today. Most recently, as the plan stealthily proceeds, Pope Francis, the first Jesuit pope, has been labeled the World Pope by Time magazine, a Catholic-controlled magazine. 21. These three meetings, at Vienna, Verona, and Chieri, were held with as much secrecy as possible. However, One man attended the first two meetings that would not be silenced. British Foreign Minister George Canning contacted the U.S. government to warn them that the monarchs of Europe were planning to destroy the free institutions of America. George Canning, it was because of this conspiracy against the American republics by the European monarchies that the great English statesman Canning called the attention of our government to it. And our statesmen then, including Thomas Jefferson, who was still living at that time, took an active part to bring about the declaration by President James Monroe in his next annual message to the Congress of the United States that the United States would regard it as an act of hostility to the government of the United States and an unfriendly act if this coalition, or if any power of Europe ever undertook to establish upon the American continent any control of any American republic or to acquire any territorial rights. This is known as the Monroe Doctrine. The threat under the secret Treaty of Verona to suppress popular government in the American republics is the basis of the Monroe Doctrine. This secret treaty sets forth clearly the conflict between monarchical government and popular government, and the government of the few as against the government of the many. Burke McCarty. The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, page 10. The Monroe Doctrine was America's response to the Jesuits' Congress of Vienna and Verona. America would consider it an act of war if any European nation sought colonial expansion in the Western Hemisphere. https://www.archives.gov/milestone documents/Monroe Doctrine. 22. The Jesuits have been able secretly to attack and infiltrate America to accomplish exactly what the Monroe Doctrine was stated to protect against. They have been able to get away with it because it was done with the utmost secrecy and under the facade of being a church, when in fact it is very much a hostile political entity. In a letter to President Monroe, Thomas Jefferson made the following observations. The question presented by the letters you have sent to me is the most momentous which has ever been offered to my contemplation since that of independence. That made us a nation. This sets our compass and points the course which we are to steer through the ocean of time opening on us, and never could we embark on it under circumstances more auspicious. Our first and fundamental maxim should be, never to entangle ourselves in the broils of Europe. Our second, never to suffer Europe to intermeddle with cisatlantic affairs. America, North and South, has a set of interests distinct from those of Europe, and peculiarly her own. She should therefore have a system of her own, separate and apart from that of Europe. While the last is laboring to become the domicile of despotism, our endeavor should surely be to make our hemisphere that of freedom. We must be declaring our protest against the atrocious violations of the rights of nations, by the interference of anyone in the internal affairs of another, so flagitiously begun by Bonaparte, and now continued by the equally lawless alliance, calling itself holy. We will oppose, with all of our means, the forcible interposition of any other power. The question now proposed involves consequences so lasting, and effects so decisive of our future destinies, as to rekindle all the interest I have heretofore felt on such occasions, and to induce me to the hazard of opinions, which will prove only my wish to contribute still my might towards anything which may be useful to our country. Archives, Mount Holyoke College, a women's Catholic college in S. Hadley, M.A. James Monroe Thomas Jefferson saw this as a great crisis in America's young history, because the wily and sinister Jesuits had been ordered to target America's destruction. The Monroe Doctrine challenged any advance on America by Europe. However, Monroe did not really understand or consider that the crafty Jesuits would not initially use the force of arms to gain their objectives. Instead, they would seek to use cunning, craftiness, infiltration, and utmost secrecy. 23. They would appeal to men's basest points. They would plant their agents in positions of wealth and power, and then use their influence to gain their great prize, the subversion and destruction of every Protestant principle as outlined in the Constitution of the United States. Please do not be naive enough to think this holy alliance is not still alive and very influential in the United States. Remember this. https://content time com/time/subscriber/article/0 33,009 974,931 00 HTML Jesuit Coadjutor Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II https://gaps. GDA. PL/N/Obiect/Monument to John Paul Roman II and Ronald Reagan/Any questions. 24. Chapter 2. President Andrew Jackson Andrew Jackson was elected to the U.S. presidency in the year 1828. His bravery and military skill in defeating the British in the War of 1812 are well established. He fought many battles in open combat, but now he was facing an entirely different enemy. This enemy claimed to be American just like him. It claimed to want the best for America just like him, and occupied high positions of responsibility just like him. Andrew Jackson, the Jesuits were going to destroy America as determined by the sinister councils at Vienna, Verona, and Chieri, and it was during the presidency of Andrew Jackson that they began to apply their treachery in full force. These Jesuits and Jesuit coadjutors moved among the American people and looked just like Americans. They were, in fact, American citizens, but their loyalty was and always will be to the Pope of Rome. Their aims and purposes are always those of the papacy. These people are covert, embedded traitors, and a serious threat to the continued existence of the United States. A nation can survive its fools and even the ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banners openly against the city. But the traitor moves among those within the gates freely, his sly whispers rustling through all the alleys, heard in the very halls of government itself. For the traitor appears no traitor. He speaks in the accents familiar to his victims, and he wears their face and their garments, and he appeals to the baseness that lies deep in the hearts of all men. He rots the soul of a nation. He works secretly and unknown in the night to undermine the pillars of a city. He infects the body politic so that it can no longer resist. Marcus Cicero, speaking to Caesar, Crassus, Pompey, and the Roman Senate. Two of these historical American traitors were John C. Calhoun and Nicholas Biddle. John C. Calhoun, Nicholas Biddle. 25. Andrew Jackson won the presidency in 1828 by a very wide margin. His vice president was John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. Calhoun realized that the love for freedom was very strong in the hearts of all Americans. He favored slavery and realized that slavery was rapidly being hemmed in because nearly all the territories purchased from Spain and France were made free. Without a continual expansion of slavery, it would eventually be defeated. In order to derail the current anti-slavery trends in America, Calhoun began a newspaper in Washington called the United States Telegraph. In this paper, he began to advocate the subversive idea called states' rights. He understood that the doctrine of states' rights as written would lead inevitably to the complete abolishment of the United States. It presumed that a state had an inherent right to do whatever it wanted. Under the principles of states' rights, if a state wanted to secede from the Union, it could do so. This would eventually eliminate the United States. This was Calhoun's goal: divide and conquer. The doctrine of states' rights was written by Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis was an American Catholic politician who served as the only president of the Confederate States of America from 1861 to 1865. Jesuit coadjutor Jefferson Davis Calhoun took a festering sore and turned it into a reason for the Southern states to secede from the Union. The festering sore was the high tariff placed on foreign imports, which made European goods more expensive. Since Europe bought large amounts of Southern cotton and other commodities, the tariff meant that Southern merchants made less money for their exports. This tax helped Northern manufacturers because now the Southern merchant would buy more from him. 26. Calhoun convinced the Southern states that they were getting a very bad deal and that they had the right to leave the Union over this issue. The South, being an agricultural region, was easily convinced that a high tariff on foreign imports was injurious to them. He next undertook to explain to the South that these high duties were placed on specific articles and was done as special favor to protect local interests. Thus he said to the people of the South, "You are being taxed to support Northern manufacturers." And it was on this popular issue he planted his nullification flag. This new bastard democracy meant the right to destroy, peaceably or by force, when ready, the federal union. John Smith Dye, The Adder's Den, p. 22. Shortly after Calhoun started his paper, there was a meeting called to honor the memory of Thomas Jefferson. At this meeting, Andrew Jackson was asked to speak. He arose and declared, "Our federal union, it must be preserved." After saying this, Jackson sat down. Calhoun then arose and declared, "The union next to our liberties most dear. May we all remember that it can only be preserved by respecting the rights of the states and distributing equally the benefits and burdens of the union." Ibid. p. 19. That sounded good, but Calhoun put the union second to our liberties. The Union and the Constitution are what established our liberties. Do states' rights supersede federal rights? Article VI, Paragraph 2 of the U.S. Constitution is commonly referred to as the Supremacy Clause. It establishes that the federal Constitution, and federal law generally, take precedence over state laws, and even state constitutions. If the Union were dissolved, the states would be at each other's throats, just like the countries of Europe down through history. The resources of the states would be constantly used up, always preparing for war with each other. This was the objective of Calhoun and the papacy from the beginning. Their stated goal was to destroy the United States. One major and continuous strain on the Union, from roughly 1820 through the Civil War, was the issue of trade and tariffs. Heavily dependent upon international trade, the almost entirely agricultural and export-oriented South imported most of its manufactured goods from Europe or obtained them from the North. The North, by contrast, had a growing domestic industrial economy that viewed foreign trade as competition. Trade barriers, especially protective tariffs, were viewed as harmful to the Southern economy, which depended on exports. In 1828, the Congress passed protective tariffs to benefit trade in the northern states, but that were detrimental to the South. Southerners vocally expressed their tariff opposition in documents such as the South Carolina Exposition and Protest in 1828, written in response to the Tariff of Abominations. Exposition and Protest was the work of South Carolina Senator and former Vice President John C. Calhoun, formerly an advocate of protective tariffs and internal improvements at federal expense. Calhoun used the tariff to create friction between the North and the South. Congress could have easily changed the tariff, so that was no reason for secession. Many spoke out against his underhanded methods. 27 Daniel Webster said, "Sir, the world will scarcely believe that this whole controversy, and all the desperate means which its support requires, has no other foundation than a difference of opinion between a majority of the people of South Carolina on the one side and a vast majority of the people of the United States on the other. The world will not credit the fact. We who hear and see it can ourselves hardly yet believe it." Ibid. p. 25. Daniel Webster knew that the issue went far deeper than a tariff. Calhoun was the puppet, a Jesuit plant being used to split America in two. John Quincy Adams in the House of Representatives declared, "In opposition to the compromise of Mr. Clay, no victim is necessary, and yet you propose to bind us hand and foot, to pour out our blood upon the altar, to appease the unnatural discontent of the South, a discontent having deeper root than the tariff, and will continue when that is forgotten." Ibid. p. 25. John Quincy Adams was correct in his observation. The tariff issue died, but the smoldering embers of division had split America in half. The blood of the Civil War can be traced back to the Jesuit agent, John C. Calhoun. Question: is America divided by any issues today? Why? As we watch Calhoun seek to rend America in two, let us remember the words of ex-Catholic priest Charles Chiniquy. Rome saw at once that the very existence of the United States was a formidable menace to her own life. From the very beginning, she perfidiously sowed the germs of division and hatred between the two great sections of this country, and succeeded in dividing South from North on the burning question of slavery. That division was her golden opportunity to crush one by the other and reign over the bloody ruins of both, a favored, long-standing policy. Charles Chiniquy, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, Chick Publications, p. 291. Charles Chiniquy. 28 Even though Vice President, Calhoun was not a loyal citizen of the United States. He worked to advance the Pope's agenda of destroying America from within. He seemed to be an American, but was really a Jesuit coadjutor in the Pope's army in the effort to destroy America. Priest Phelan makes this statement. Why, if the government of the United States were at war with the church, we would say tomorrow, to hell with the government of the United States. And if the church and all the governments of the world were at war, we would say, to hell with all the governments of the world. Why is it the Pope has such tremendous power? Why the Pope is the ruler of the world? All the emperors, all the kings, all the princes, all the presidents of the world are as these altar boys of mine. Priest D.S. Phelan, Western Watchman, June 27, 1912. The Western Watchman was established in 1865 by Rev. D.S. Phelan, a priest of the Catholic Church at Medina. The Drake Constitution, then in force, prescribed a test oath for clergymen, and Mr. Phelan, refusing to take the oath, was imprisoned. The Western Watchman was started to agitate for a repeal of the obnoxious law. In 1867, the paper was moved to St. Louis, Mr. Phelan having been transferred there. It is published weekly and is the organ of the English-speaking Catholics of the diocese. From the History of St. Louis City and County by John Thomas Scharf, 1883. John C. Calhoun was one of the papal altar boys, a Jesuit coadjutor doing as he was told. Andrew Jackson, in his message to Congress in 1832, stated this. 29. The right of the people of a single state to absolve themselves at will, and without the consent of the other states, from their most solemn obligations, and hazard the liberties and happiness of millions comprising this nation, cannot be acknowledged. Such authority is believed to be wholly repugnant, both to the principles upon which the general government is constituted, and the objects which it is expressly formed to obtain. John Smith Dye, The Adder's Den, p. 25. Jackson knew that Calhoun's plot was devised to destroy the United States and its constitutional liberties, and this was unacceptable to him. Jackson was standing in the way of the Congresses of Vienna, Verona, and Chieri, and the Jesuits had to deal with him. Nicholas Biddle, another one of their agent coadjutors, carried out Phase 2 of the Jesuit attack. Biddle was a brilliant financier, having graduated from the University of Pennsylvania at the age of 13. He was a master of the science of money. By the time Jackson came to the presidency in 1828, Biddle was in full control of the federal government's central bank. This was not the first time that a central bank had been established. Twice before, first under Robert Morris, and then under Alexander Hamilton, had a central bank been tried. But in both cases it had failed because of fraudulent actions on the part of the bankers who were in control, Jesuit coadjutors. After the War of 1812, a central bank was tried again, and it was in this third attempt that we find Mr. Biddle. Nicholas Biddle, who was behind Nicholas Biddle, and the attempt to have a central bank in the United States. The blunt reality is that the Jewish, Rothschild banking dynasty in Europe was the dominant force, both financially and politically, in the formation of the Bank of the United States. G. Edward Griffin, The Creature from Jekyll Island, American Opinion Publishing, p. 331. Over the years since Nathan M. Rothschild, the Manchester textile manufacturer, had bought cotton from the southern states, the Rothschilds had developed heavy American commitments. Nathan had made loans to various states of the Union, had been, for a time, the official European banker for the U.S. government, and was a pledged supporter of the Bank of the United States. Derrick Wilson, Rothschild, The Wealth and Power of a Dynasty, Charles Scribner's Sons, p. 178. 30. Nathan Mayer Rothschild. The Rothschilds long had a powerful influence in dictating American financial laws. The law records show that they were the power in the old Bank of the United States. Gustavus Myers, History of the Great American Fortunes, Random House, p. 556. The instigators behind Biddle in his efforts to establish the central bank were the Rothschilds. And for whom was the Rothschild family of coadjutors working? The Treaty of Paris of 1763 designated King George III, Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elector of the Holy Roman Empire. And, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia, the Rothschilds bear the title Guardians of the Papal Treasure. https://www.jewishencyclopedia.com/articles/12909 Rothschild. The Vatican Treasury, of course, holds the imperial wealth of Rome. Imperial wealth grows in proportion to its victories in war. As the Jesuit empowerment Regimini Militantes Ecclesiae implies, the church at war is more necessary than the church at peace. According to H. Russell Robinson's Illustrated Armor of Imperial Rome. Caesarian soldiers protect themselves in battle with shields painted red. Since the soldiery is the state's most valuable resource, the Council of Trent admitted this in preferring the Jesuits to all other religious orders. It is easy to understand why the red shield was identified with the very life of the church. Hence, the appropriateness of the name Rothschild, German for red shield. The appointment of Rothschilds gave the Black Papacy absolute financial control, privacy, and secrecy. The appointment of Rothschild gave the Black Papacy absolute financial privacy and secrecy. Who would ever search a family of Orthodox Jews for the key to the wealth of the Roman Catholic Church? I believe this appointment explains why the House of Rothschild is famous for helping nations go to war. It is fascinating that, as Mayer Rothschild's sons grew into the family business, the firm took on the title Mayer Amschel Rothschild und Sohn, which gives us the Nodarican Mars. Isn't Mars the Roman god of war, whose heavenly manifestation is the red planet? There is powerful Kabbalah here, and there's hardly an acre of inhabitable earth that hasn't been affected by it in some way. F. Tupper Saucy, Rulers of Evil, HarperCollins, p. 161-61, The Jewish Encyclopedia, Vol. 2, p. 497, admits that it is a somewhat curious sequel to the attempt to set up a Catholic competitor to the Rothschild, that at the present time, 1905, the latter are the guardians of the papal treasure. 31. International finance and banking are not primarily Jewish. Many of the most powerful banking interests in the world are run by Gentiles. One of the most powerful forces in international banking is the Knights of Malta, a Roman Catholic military order controlled by the Jesuit Superior General. Sadly, even a certain segment of the alternative media helps to propagate the lie that the Jews run international banking. Interestingly, one of the titles of the Rothschild banking dynasty is Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. The Jews, as a people, have been used for centuries as a scapegoat by these international banksters and their secret societies, such as the Jesuit-controlled Knights of Malta. To label the Jews as running banking, Hollywood, etc., is to throw out the proverbial red herring designed to throw us off the scent of the real controllers. Daryl Eberhardt, editor of Tackling the Tough Topics, January 28, 2006. The Rothschilds were used by the Jesuits as agent coadjutors who used their Jewish background as a facade to cover their sinister activities. The Jesuits, working through Rothschild and Biddle, sought to gain control of the banking system of the United States. Did they succeed? The Jesuit general has been the most powerful man in the world since Pius VII restored the order, or company, in 1814. Because of the order's suppression by the Pope in 1773, the Jesuits began the Bavarian Illuminati with one of their soldiers, Adam Weishaupt. The Illuminati absorbed the Jewish house of Rothschild, creating a colossus of wealth around the world, subject to the Jesuit general. With this financial arm in place, the Jesuits then made war on the Vatican, including the Pope, the Roman Catholic monarchs of Europe, and the Order of the Dominicans. This Inquisition and crusade was called the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. For 25 years, the Jesuit generals' Masonic agents, particularly in the person of Napoleon Bonaparte, conducted war. Bonaparte also punished the Knights of Malta, driving them from their island home to Russia. Eric John Phelps, Vatican Assassins, 2nd ed., p. 582, the Jesuits, now formally suppressed by the Pope, were allied with Frederick the Great of Prussia and Catherine II of Russia. The Jesuit general was in control of Scottish Rite Freemasonry and now sought an alliance with the Masonic Baron of the House of Rothschild. To accomplish this, he chose a Jesuit who was a German Gentile, not a Jew by race and a Freemason by association, Adam Weishaupt. Eric John Phelps, Vatican Assassins, 3rd ed., p. 401, seldom is it mentioned that the Rothschild, along with other Western bankers and industrialists, financed the rise of Hitler as a bulwark against the Soviets. The ultra-right wing falsely describes the Rothschild as Jewish bankers. 32 when, in fact, the Rothschilds are interwoven with the Catholic Church, and jointly with the traditional mafia and the American CIA, interlocked with the Vatican Bank, which was pro-Nazi. Sherman H. Skolnick, The Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. The Jesuits were driven to cooperate with the other two international brotherhoods, the Freemasons and the Jews Rothschilds Illuminati, in the destruction of the Spanish Empire. Salvador de Madariaga, Spanish statesman. The Jesuits, 1820, during the order's suppression from 1773 to 1814 by Pope Clement XIV, General Rixai 18th Superior General of the Society of Jesus, 1758-1775, created the Order of the Illuminati with his soldier, Adam Weishaupt, uniting the House of Rothschild with the Society of Jesus. G.B. Nicolini, History of the Jesuits, Their Origin, Progress, Doctrines, and Designs, London, Henry G. Bone, 1889 pp. 356-357. Weishaupt and his fellow Jesuits cut off the income to the Vatican by launching and leading the French Revolution, by directing Napoleon's conquest of Catholic Europe, as the order would attempt to do again later with Hitler, by the revolt against the Church, led by such priests as Father Hidalgo, in Mexico and Latin America, by eventually having Napoleon throw Pope Pius VII in jail at Avignon until he agreed, as the price for his release, to re-establish the Jesuit order. This Jesuit war on the Vatican was terminated by the Congress of Vienna and by the secret, 1822, Treaty of Verona. Ever since, the Rothschilds have been the fiscal agents of the Vatican. Emanuel M. Josephson, Jewish-American physician and historian. The Federal Reserve Conspiracy and Rockefellers, 1968 in the United States, President Andrew Jackson was not at all happy with the Jesuit-controlled central bank. When Biddle sought to renew the bank's charter in 1832, President Jackson put his re-election bid on the line and vetoed Congress' attempt to renew the charter. He vetoed it for 3 reasons. 1, the bank was becoming a monopoly. 2, it was unconstitutional. And 3, it was a grave danger to the country by having the bank heavily dominated by foreign interests, the Rothschilds who were controlled by the Jesuits. Andrew Jackson felt that the very security of America was in danger from these foreign interests. He said, "Is there no danger to our liberty and independence in a bank that in its nature has so little to bind it to our country? Is there not cause to tremble for the purity of our elections in peace and for the independence of our country in war? Controlling our currency, receiving our public moneys, and holding thousands of our citizens in dependence, it would be more formidable and dangerous than a naval and military power of the enemy." Herman E. Cross, Documentary History of Banking and Currency in the United States, Chelsea House, pp. 26-27. This was around 1832. There was no openly declared war involving the United States at that time. Jackson's comments were nothing new. JFK later said basically the same. Others understood the power wielded by those who ran the bank. Mayor Rothschild said, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws." G. Edward Griffin, The Creature from Jekyll Island, American Opinion Publishing, p. 218. 33. This is the Jesuits/Rothschilds' golden rule. The one who has the gold makes the rules. G. Edward Griffin then writes, "The Rothschild dynasty had conquered the world more thoroughly, more cunningly, and much more lastingly than all the Caesars before or all the Hitlers after them." Ibid, p. 218. Thomas Jefferson has this to say about the central bank. "A private central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberties of the people than a standing army. We must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt." Ibid, p. 329. The Jesuits used Biddle and the Rothschilds to gain the upper hand in American banking because they knew they could then control the people and effectively eventually rewrite the Constitution according to papal law. Jackson was trying to stop them. He failed. This covert battle is still going on today. Let us take a closer look at the central bank and see why it is so dangerous. Most people do not understand the central bank, aka the Federal Reserve Bank. Here is a very simplified scenario that explains one of the operations of the Federal Reserve. It is necessary to understand that in spite of its name, the Federal Reserve Bank is not owned by the United States government as many believe. The central bank, or the Federal Reserve Bank, is a private bank, owned by some of the richest and most powerful people in the world. This bank has nothing to do with the U.S. government other than the connection, which allows the operation described below. The Federal Reserve Bank has a total, government-enforced monopoly in money. Federal Reserve Note is a term to describe the paper fiat, currency, dollar bills, circulating in the United States. The U.S. Treasury prints the Federal Reserve Notes at the instruction of the Board of Governors and the 12 Federal Reserve member banks. 34 Federal Reserve Note before we had the central bank. Each individual bank competed with other banks. The customers, the consumers, got the best deal. Not anymore. We all know that today the United States government borrows money, Federal Reserve Notes, and operates under astronomical debt in the trillions of dollars. Why is this? Do you operate with your personal finances like that? Common sense dictates that a policy of such enormous debt will sooner or later destroy the organization that practices it, because the interest on its debt must increase beyond its income, making payoff impossible. And that's where we're at today. https://www.ustitclock.org/. 35 These borrowed Federal Reserve Notes replaced the silver certificate. A silver certificate is a previous version of the U.S. dollar, USD, bills that are no longer printed or circulated in the United States. It is a type of former legal tender in the form of paper currency, which was issued by the U.S. government beginning in 1878. 36. Now to our present scenario. Here roughly is how the operation proceeds. Suppose the United States government wants to borrow $1 billion. It borrowed $700 billion in 2008-2009. The government issues a bond for this amount, much as a water company does when it wants to raise money for a new pipeline or a new dam. A bond is basically a promissory note to be paid back at a later date, with interest. The government delivers this bond for the $1 billion to the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank takes the bond and writes an order to the Treasury's Department of Printing and Engraving to print the $1 billion worth of bills. After a short time, when the bills are printed, the Department of Printing and Engraving ships the bills to the Federal Reserve Bank, which then writes a check for about $2,000 to pay for printing the $1 billion worth of bills. The Federal Reserve Bank then takes the $1 billion and lends the $1 billion to the United States government, and the people of the country pay interest at an exorbitant rate each year on this money, through taxes, money which came out of nothing. The owners of the Federal Reserve Bank put up nothing for this money. It is literally just like monopoly play money, printed at will with nothing backing its value. In 2020, they removed all obstacles to printing spending literally as much as they want for the COVID-19 pandemic. https://www. Usespending. gov/disaster/COVID-19. We see, therefore, that when the United States government goes into debt $1, a dollar plus the interest goes into the pockets of the owners of the Federal Reserve Bank. Who owns the Federal Reserve Bank? This is the largest, the most colossal thieving criminal enterprise ever perpetrated in the history of mankind. And it is so slick, so entrenched, so subtle, and so obfuscated by propaganda from the news media that the victims, you, a taxpayer, are not even aware of what is happening. Can you see why the Jesuits want to keep this operation secret? 37. The Constitution of the United States gives to Congress the power to coin money. If Congress coined its own money as the Constitution directs, it would not have to pay the hundreds of billions of dollars of interest that it now pays each year to the Federal Reserve bankers for the national debt, for money that came out of nothing. Money coined by Congress would be debt-free, and it would be backed by the gold reserves of the country. President John F. Kennedy tried to do this. Look what happened to him. Jesuit agent Nicholas Biddle responded to Andrew Jackson's refusing to allow him to re-establish the central bank by shrinking the nation's money supply. He did this by refusing to make loans to banks. By so doing, he upended the economy and money disappeared. Unemployment ran high. Companies went bankrupt because they could not get operating money. The nation went into a panic depression. Biddle felt he could force Jackson to keep the central bank. So confident was he that he publicly boasted that he had caused the economic woes in America. Due to his foolish bragging, others came out in defense of Jackson, and the central bank died, temporarily. It died until its re-establishment in 1913. It was re-established then by the same people, the Jesuits of Rome, for the same purpose of bringing America to her knees and planting the temporal power of the Pope in America. The Jesuits, scheming for a central bank in America, was temporarily stopped during Andrew Jackson's presidency. He had opposed Calhoun's states' rights doctrine, and he stopped Biddle's attempt to continue the central bank. Remember that Jesuit oath. When other things fail, the Jesuit oath declares that it is commendable to murder someone who stands in their way because the ends justify the means. The president had earned the undying hatred of monetary scientists, both in America and abroad. The Jesuits were furious. It is not surprising, therefore, that on January 30, 1835, an assassination attempt was made against him. Miraculously, both pistols of the assailant misfired, and Jackson was spared. It was the first such attempt to be made against the life of a president of the United States. The would-be assassin was Richard Lawrence, who either was truly insane or who pretended to be insane to escape harsh punishment. At any rate, Lawrence was found not guilty due to insanity. Later, he boasted to friends that he had been in touch with powerful people in Europe who had promised to protect him from punishment should he be caught. Ibid. p. 357. The Jesuit order was, and still is, dead serious about taking over the United States. They have infiltrated into government at the highest levels and use their agents in controlling the American banking system. They will also use assassination when necessary to destroy any opposition to their plans. Andrew Jackson was almost assassinated by a Jesuit plant who bragged of powerful Europeans, the Jesuits, that would set him free in case he was caught. Other presidents came along who also incurred the undying wrath of Rome. Several have been assassinated, and a few escaped certain death. The next chapter, which discusses the presidencies of William Henry Harrison, Zachary Taylor, and James Buchanan, will fill in the details. 38 Chapter 3, Presidents Harrison, Taylor, and Buchanan. William Henry Harrison was elected to the presidency of the United States in the year 1841. He was already well up in years at 67, but he was very healthy and robust. All who knew him felt that he would have no problem going through his full 4 years in office. However, just 35 days after taking the oath of office, President Harrison was dead on April 4, 1841. Most, if not all, encyclopedias will tell you that he died of pneumonia after giving his inaugural address in the severe cold of Washington, D.C., but that is not correct. He did not die of pneumonia as claimed. William Henry Harrison, when Harrison came to office in March 1841, a very tense situation existed in the country. Trouble was brewing between the North and the South over the issue of slavery. There was contention over the annexation of Texas, whether it would be admitted free or slave. An attempt had been made on President Jackson's life just 6 years before. Harrison took office a short 20 years before the Civil War. The influence of the Jesuits was weighing heavily upon America. As we have already seen, the Congresses at Vienna, Verona, and Chieri were determined to destroy popular government wherever it was found. The prime target was the United States and the destruction of every Protestant principle. The despicable Jesuits were ordered to carry out this destruction. Andrew Jackson faced the onslaught of the Jesuits via the political minefields of John C. Calhoun and the financial wizardry of Nicholas Biddle. William Henry Harrison had also refused to go along with the Jesuits' goals for America. In his inaugural address, he made these comments: "We admit of no government by divine right, believing that so far as power is concerned, the beneficent Creator has made no distinction among men, that all are upon an equality, and that the only legitimate right to govern is upon the expressed grant of power from the governed." Burke McCarty, The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, Arya-Varta Publishing, p. 44. By that statement, President Harrison had just incurred the deadly wrath of the Jesuits. With these unmistakable words, President Harrison made his position clear. He hurled defiance to the divine right enemies of our popular government. Burke McCarty is talking about Rome when she says that. Aye, he did more, for those were the words that signed his death warrant. Just 1 month and 5 days from that day, President Harrison lay a corpse in the Andrew White House. He died from arsenic poisoning, administered by the tools of Rome. The Jesuit oath had been swiftly carried out. 39. I do further promise and declare that I will, when opportunity presents, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, as I am directed to do, to extirpate them and exterminate them from the face of the earth. That when the same cannot be done openly, I will secretly use the poison cup regardless of the honor, rank, dignity, or authority of the person or persons. Whatsoever may be their condition in life, either public or private, as I at any time may be directed so to do by an agent of the Pope or superior of the Brotherhood of the Holy Faith of the Society of Jesus. Ibid. pp. 44-46. For nearly 1,000 years, the Roman Catholic popes felt that they ruled by divine right, that their power had come directly from God, and they still believe that, and that all men were to bow to their authority and control. If a monarch or ruler would not submit his position, and the country he ruled into the hands of the Pope, then that person had no right to rule. When Harrison stated that, "We admit of no government by divine right," he was declaring that he and the United States were in no way going to submit to the Pope's control. To the Pope and his heinous Jesuits, this was a slap in the face that they felt must be dealt with immediately. It was not Harrison alone that had rejected Rome's authority, for he was simply stating what the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution had declared before him. Our republic totally refused the control that the Pope and the Jesuits were trying to apply. When a nation, church, or individual refuses to submit to the authority of the papacy, they are finished. Unless God intervenes, the lives of those opposing the papacy will be terminated. This concept is completely foreign to the thinking of people who have lived under a free, constitutional government. The inalienable rights to worship God according to the dictates of one's own conscience and a government without a king are taken for granted in the United States today. We don't realize that Harrison's statement was a dagger aimed at the heart of the papacy's existence. Another ruler who refused to be dictated to by the papacy was Queen Elizabeth of England. She was one of Henry VIII's daughters and ruled England from 1558 to 1603. She ascended the throne following the death of her half-sister, Bloody Mary, who ruled England from 1553 to 1558. Mary had been a Catholic sovereign, but Elizabeth was a Protestant. Queen Elizabeth I. 40 after her accession, Elizabeth wrote to Sir Richard Crane, the English ambassador in Rome, to notify the people of her accession. But she was informed by His Holiness that England was a fief servant or slave of the Holy See, that Elizabeth had no right to assume the crown without his permission, that she was not born in lawful wedlock, and could not therefore reign over England, that her safest course was to renounce all claims to the throne and submit herself entirely to his will. Then he would treat her as tenderly as possible. But if she refused his advice, he would not spare her. She declined the Pope's advice, and the hatred of Pewes and his successors was assured. J.E.C. Shepherd, The Babington Plot, Wittenberg Publications, p. 46. Queen Elizabeth wisely rejected the assumed divine right of the papacy to rule over and control the throne of England. Because of this, there were at least 5 attempts to assassinate her. These attempts all failed because she had a superb secret service group, and her life was saved. One such plot was called the Babington Plot, which was a plan in 1586 to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I, a Protestant, and put Mary, Queen of Scots, her Roman Catholic cousin, on the English throne. The long-term goal of the plot was the invasion of England by the Spanish forces of King Philip II and the Catholic League in France, leading to the restoration of the old religion. When the papacy realized that all their efforts to assassinate Elizabeth had failed, they turned to one of their Catholic sons, Philip II of Spain. In 1580, the papacy arranged for Spain to invade England using the Spanish Armada. Later, it was Pope Sixtus X who promised Philip of Spain 1,000,000 scudi, silver coins formerly used in various Italian states, to assist in equipping his invincible armada to destroy the throne of Elizabeth, and the only condition the Pope made in bestowment of his gift. He should have the nomination of the English sovereign, and that the kingdom should become a fief of the Church. Ibid. p. 47. Philip II of Spain, the Spanish Armada, the famous Spanish Armada, was sent to crush England because Elizabeth would not yield her throne and kingdom to the authority of the Pope. For 30 years, the Jesuits tried to kill Elizabeth, but failed. Finally, they conspired with Philip II of Spain to annihilate her with the Spanish Armada. We charge the popes of the succession with being the prime movers in the entire adult life of Elizabeth to deliberately destroy her and her kingdom, forcing England's return to the domination of their evil, enslaving system, called the Roman Catholic Church. Not only was the Pope the prime mover of the seditious intrigues in England, but he was the mainspring of the ongoing treachery. 41. The Pope insisted on exercising absolute authority and sovereignty over all kings and princes, and dared to assume the prerogatives of deity in wielding his spiritual and temporal swords. Ibid. pp. 98-99. Likewise, as William Henry Harrison took his oath to become the President of the United States, the Jesuits saw a man that openly opposed them and their plans. Unfortunately, President Harrison was poisoned just 35 days into his term of office. William Henry Harrison, General Harrison, did not die of natural disease. No failure of health or strength existed, but something sudden and fatal. He did not die of apoplexy, that is a disease, but arsenic would produce a sudden effect, and it would also be fatal from the commencement. This is the chief weapon of the medical assassin. Oxalic acid, prussic acid, or salts of strychnine would be almost instant death, and would give but little advantage for escape to the murderer. Therefore, his was not a case of acute poisoning, when death takes place almost instantaneously, but of chronic, where the patient dies slowly. He lived about 6 days after he received the drug. John Smith Dye, The Adder's Den, p. 37. United States Senator Thomas Benton concurs. There was no failure of health or strength to indicate such an event, or to excite apprehension that he would not go through his term with the same vigor with which he commenced it. His attack was sudden and evidently fatal from the commencement. Senator Thomas Benton, 30 Years View, Volume II, p. 21. Quoted in John Smith Dye's book, The Adder's Den, page 36. William Henry Harrison became the first U.S. president to fall a victim of the Jesuits in their attempt to take over the United States, destroy the Constitution, and install the papacy as the supreme ruler in America. If any U.S. president or any other leader refused to take orders from the Jesuits, they, too, would be targets of assassination. For example, President Zachary Taylor refused to go along with the destruction of America, and he was the next to fall. Taylor was known as a great military man. His friends called him Old Rough and Ready. He came to the White House in March 1849, and 16 months later, he was dead. Zachary Taylor. 42. They used the invasion of Cuba as the test for President Taylor, and had their plans ready to launch their nefarious scheme in the early part of his administration. But from the very beginning, President Taylor snuffed out all hope of its consummation during his term. Burke McCarty, The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, Arya Varta Publishing, p. 47. Here is what would have happened if Zachary Taylor had invaded Cuba. There was Catholic Austria, Catholic Spain, Catholic France, and England all waiting, ready to do battle with the United States of America if he had invaded Cuba. What chance would this young republic have had against the united powers of Catholic Europe at that time? The papacy well understood this, and that is why they pushed Taylor so hard to invade. Taylor committed another crime against Rome. He spoke passionately about the preservation of the Union. The Jesuits were striving hard to split the nation in two prior to the Civil War, and the president was trying hard to keep it together. Jesuit agent John C. Calhoun visited the Department of State and requested the president to say nothing in his forthcoming message about the Union. But Calhoun had little influence over Taylor, for after his visit, the following remarkable passage was added to Taylor's speech. Attachment to the Union of States should be fostered in every American heart. For more than half a century during which kingdoms and empires have fallen, this union has stood unshaken. In my judgment, its dissolution would be the greatest of calamities, and to avert that should be the steady aim of every American. Upon its preservation must depend our own happiness and that of generations to come. Whatever dangers may threaten it, I shall stand by it and maintain it in its integrity to the full extent of the obligations imposed and power conferred upon me by the Constitution. John Smith Dye, The Adder's Den, pp. 51-52. McCarty picks up the story from here. There was no quibbling in this. The pro-slavery leaders had nothing to count on in Taylor, therefore they decided on his assassination. The arch-plotters, fearing that suspicion might be aroused by the death of the president early in his administration, as in the case of President Harrison, permitted him to serve 1 year and 4 months, when on the 4th of July, arsenic was administered to him during a celebration in Washington at which he was invited to deliver the address. He went in perfect health in the morning and was taken ill in the afternoon about 5 o'clock and died on the Monday following, having been sick the same number of days and with precisely the same symptoms as was his predecessor, President Harrison. Burke McCarty, The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, Arya-Varta Publishing, p. 48. The slave power, the Jesuits, had now sufficient reason to count him as an enemy, and his history gave them to understand that he never surrendered. Those having slavery politically committed to their care had long before sworn that no person should ever occupy the presidential chair that opposed their schemes in the interest of slavery. They resolved to take his life. This the slave power, the Jesuits, understood, and they determined to serve him as they had previously served General Harrison, and only waited a favorable opportunity to carry out their hellish intent. The celebration of the 4th of July was near at hand, and it was resolved to take advantage of that day and give him the fatal drug. John Smith Die, The Adder's Den, pp. 5253. 43 Taylor died 5 days later on July 9, 1850. President Zachary Taylor's sudden death shocked the nation. After attending 4th of July orations for most of the day, Taylor walked along the Potomac River before returning to the White House. Hot and tired, he drank iced water and consumed large quantities of cherries and other fruits which poisoned him. 6 years later, James Buchanan, a Pennsylvania Democrat, was elected president. James Buchanan had wined and dined with the Southerners, and it appeared as though he would go along with their desires. James Buchanan, the new president, proved himself a decided trimmer. Although he was a Northern man, he had strongly courted the Southern leaders and given them to understand that he was, with them, heart and soul. In short, he double-crossed them. The gentleman had had his ear to the ground evidently, and had heard the rumble of the abolitionists' wheels. He coolly informed them that he was president of the North, as well as of the South. This change of attitude was indicated by his very decided stand against Jefferson Davis and his party, and he made known his intention of settling the question of slavery in the free states to the satisfaction of the people in those states. Burke McCarty, The Suppressed Truth About the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln, Arya-Varta Publishing, p. 50. James Buchanan didn't have to wait long to find out what the Jesuits would do to him for double-crossing them. On Washington's birthday, Buchanan's stand became known, and the next day he was poisoned. The plot was deep and planned with skill. Mr. Buchanan, as was customary with men in his station, had a table and chairs reserved for himself and friends in the dining room at the National Hotel. The president was known to be an inveterate tea drinker. In fact, Northern people rarely drink anything else in the evening. Southern men prefer coffee. Thus, to make sure of Buchanan and his Northern friends, arsenic was sprinkled in the bowls containing the tea and lump sugar and set on the table where he was to sit. The pulverized sugar in the bowls used for coffee on the other tables was kept free from the poison. Not a single Southern man was affected or harmed. 50 or 60 persons dined at the table that evening, and as nearly as can be learned, about 38 died from the effects of the poison. President Buchanan was poisoned, and with great difficulty his life was saved. His physicians treated him understandingly from instructions given by himself as to the cause of the illness, for he understood well what was the matter. 44 The National Hotel, demolished in 1942. Since the appearance of the epidemic, the tables at the National Hotel have been almost empty. Have the proprietors of the hotel or clerks or servants suffered from it? If not, in what respect did their diet and accommodations differ from those of the guests? There is more in this calamity than meets the eye. It's a matter that should not be trifled with. The New York Post, March 18, 1857. James Buchanan was poisoned and almost died. He lived because he knew that he had been given arsenic poisoning, and so informed his doctors. He knew that the Jesuits poisoned Harrison and Taylor the same way. The Jesuits created a controversy to cover their tracks. The national hotel epidemic was claimed to be a mysterious sickness which afflicted persons who stayed at the National Hotel in Washington, D.C., beginning in early January 1857. At the time, the hotel was the largest in the city. By some accounts, as many as 400 people became sick, and nearly 36 all Northerners died. The illness was considered by some medical experts to have originated from an attempt to poison hotel boarders. It affected mostly patrons of the hotel's dining room and not those who frequented the bar. It began to spread more noticeably by the middle of January 1857. New cases of the illness began to decrease in number by the end of January 1857 and continued to abate until the middle of February. When the numbers of guests increased for the presidential inauguration of March 4, 1857, the sickness returned again forcefully. A physician quoted by Philadelphia's The Times newspaper vocalized the poison theory. However, dissenters contended that poisoned water was improbable because the National Hotel's water tank was used only for washing. Drinking water was brought to the establishment from a distance. In an effort to eliminate rats from the National Hotel, arsenic was used. One of the poisoned rats was discovered in the water tank after guests became ill with the sickness. The Jesuit order fulfilled their oath again that they would poison, kill, or do whatever was necessary to remove those who opposed their plans. From 1841 to 1857, we saw that 3 presidents were attacked by the Jesuits as outlined in the Congresses of Vienna, Verona, and Chieri. 2 died and 1 barely escaped. The Jesuits will allow nothing to stand in their way of total domination of America and the destruction of the Constitution. As they look at America, the priests of Rome have stated, "We are also determined to take possession of the United States, but we must proceed with the utmost secrecy. Silently and patiently, we must mass our Roman Catholics in the great cities of the United States. Remembering that the vote of a poor journeyman, though he be covered with rags, has as much weight in the scale of powers as the millionaire Astor, and that if we have 2 votes against his one, he will become as powerless as an oyster. Let us then multiply our votes. Let us call our poor but faithful Irish Catholics from every corner of the world, and gather them into the very hearts of the cities of Washington, New York, Boston, Chicago, Buffalo, Albany, Troy, Cincinnati. 45 under the shadows of those great cities, the Americans consider themselves a giant, unconquerable race. They look upon the poor Irish Catholics with supreme contempt, as only fit to dig their canals, sweep their streets, and work in their kitchens. Let no one awake those sleeping lions today. Let us pray God that they continue to sleep a few years longer, waking only to find their votes outnumbered as we will turn them forever, out of every position of honor, power, and profit. What will those so-called giants think when not a single senator or member of Congress will be chosen, unless he has submitted to our Holy Father the Pope? We will not only elect the president, but fill and command the armies, man the navies, and hold the keys of the public treasury. Then, yes, then we will rule the United States and lay them at the feet of the Vicar of Jesus Christ, that he may put an end to tea.